Hello, John Bloodworth, Gentleman Crafter here with another Scan and Cut Saturday. This week I'm going to be showing you some different styles of shadow layers applied to text, and there's very different reasons for each of them. So I'm first going to add some text. That's using the text tool, and obviously I am using the downloaded version of Canvas Workspace. Most of these should be possible in the online version as well. Some of the later ones, though, you will need the Layers tab in order to work around some things. So, the first one that we're going to do is on just the basic text, and we're going to do a basic solid shadow layer. So we use the Offset tool from the Edit menu, choose the spacing, send the direction outwards, leave the corner type and the original line set as they are, and make sure that box at the bottom is selected. Now the shadow layer always tends to be put on top, so when I apply a colour fill, you'll see that it blots out the text from underneath. That's fine. We can rearrange the text in the Layers tab to visually make a difference. In terms of cutting out, obviously you would cut them separately anyway. So that's a solid shadow layer. Now what about an open shadow layer? And that's basically a shadow layer that includes the landlocked areas in the middle of letters like the O. All we do there is change that selection that says about selecting around the outside edge. What you will notice, however, is that this new shape, this new shadow layer, is made up of various different shapes sat on one on top of the other. So when you apply a colour fill, it actually applies the fill to the central shape as well. You can get around this by basically subtracting the smaller shape from the larger shape. If the shape is too small, like in the centre of the A that you saw, then basically you can delete it. I'm just grouping these as I work, just for clarity. Obviously, if you would like a more thorough guide to Canvas Workspace, please do remember that I have 2 full courses on udemy.com. I will leave a link in the description below the video on YouTube, and of course a link in the blog post on gentlemancrafter.com. So next up we're going to change the spacing and the corner type and see what difference that makes. Obviously the spacing makes the shadow layer bigger, and the corner type, changing it from round to bevel, gives us flattened corners. This is more of a visual style. I'm not aware of any actual benefits. What I would make you aware of, though, is over on the S and the H, you'll see there's a very fine section. So we'll need to deal with that in a second. First up, I'm going to deal with these landlocked areas. And I'm doing that using the Subtract tool again. Now, whenever you subtract something, it moves the new shape to the top layer, which generally means that the smaller shapes might disappear. So just make sure you've always got the smaller shape on top. Now for that dodgy area on the left, basically I'm entering the node editing mode, selecting those nodes that are causing that line and deleting them. Again, we send the shadow layer to the back, and you can do that using keyboard shortcuts, or of course over in the Layers tab by just clicking and dragging. So there's 3 shadow styles already. Very similar, but just subtle differences. So it depends on what result you are wanting. And of course, with larger shadow layers, you can make hinged greetings cards as well. For this next one, I'm going to reduce the spacing, change the corner type back to round, and create an open shadow layer. Same issues as before, so I'm just going to delete that tiny bit in the middle of the A and subtract the smaller areas from the larger letters. Now what I'm going to do is apply a fill color, send it to the back of the stack so it shows the text on the front, and then with that group selected, I'm going to select the offset tool again, leave everything set as it was apart from the offset being on the outside only, and then as you can see we've created a shadow of a shadow. With all of those selected, you can weld those individual shapes together again and apply a fill color. So there you go, you can see we can create multiples. Again, I've got that dodgy bit in the S and the H, so just deleting that. And that's so that the cutting shape doesn't really cause any problems when we come to cut it out on the machine. If you're drawing this, wouldn't really be a problem. Okay, for the next one, if you're using vinyl, you might not want to layer things like with the shadow layer, but you might want an offset shadow to highlight some text. So to do this, what I like to do is create 3 versions of the same word, align them along the vertical and horizontal axis, then move the bottom one so that I still have the top 2, select the bottom one and the next one up, and then subtract. And now what I have is the text on the top, and then basically just the parts that I want to cut out for the shadow. They don't actually go underneath the letters, as you can see. It's just going to cut out the shadow bits. And that basically is great for vinyl because we're not adding double layers, so it's not making areas of your design super thick. It's all one layer of vinyl. Now there's one more style that I would like to show you, and this requires a little more work. So it's not the quick option. We'll start again with just the text, and we're going to create 4 additional layers. You can have more, you can have less. 4 seems to work really well for me. I'm going to align them again. This time I'm basically going to press my Shift key and my down and left arrow once, each time taking away one of the layers from the selection on the layers panel on the right. And I do this by Shift click. Then I'm reorganizing them so that the top one is basically top right, if you see what I mean. So you can already see that's great, but I'm going to apply some colors so I can see better. And to be honest, the more different the colors are, the better, because it will help you see during the next steps what you need to select. In hindsight, I probably went a bit too similar with the colors here. Makes no difference to what you actually cut out. It's really just what you can see on screen. So if we tried to cut this now and then layer this up, it would be a massive stack of stuff. What we want to do is click on divide. So we've selected everything and clicked on divide in process overlap. Now it's a whole mess, so we've got to fix it. So the first thing that I'm doing is selecting every shape that has a white fill color. Then in the Edit tab, I'm welding those together. As you can see, it's all fixed. I'm going to group those and lock that layer. Next up, I'm going to zoom in on one letter. Then with my selection tool, I'm going to select as many of the parts in one colour as I can, and then weld. And basically I'll continue doing this until all of the parts of that single colour are welded together, as you can see there. So I'm going to carry on doing that for each individual colour. And you may find that basically some shapes are grouped. So if you're trying to select it and then it's deselecting it, that's possibly why. Make sure you get as much of it as you possibly can, as it will involve less tidying later. Some won't even need it because they won't have been split. Now I've done that for each individual letter, so we can see here. And then in the Layers tab, this is what it looks like. So we've got shadow bits throughout. But I do still have some odd bits and pieces. So in order to find out what they are, I simply click on the layer in the Layers tab, and then I can see where it is. Because I know that's part of the W, I'll go and find the corresponding shape and then weld that together. Again, I've got a weird part here, that's part of the A, so I select that, weld it. Again, this one goes with the H, and weld that. As you can see, this is not the quick option, but it does give you a very dramatic effect. It's like 70s retro text. Retro, that's the word. And this is where you can see why I said earlier about using very different colours, because on the Layers tab on the right, some of them can look very, very similar. Okay, so I think I've got everything there. So what I've done now is ungrouped the white words, white letters even, sent them to the top of the stack, just for visual reference, grouped them and locked them. And now what I'm going to do is basically go through and select all of the shapes of the same colour. Now, as I say, if these were different colours in the Layers tab, then it may have been easier to select them. However, I was struggling at this point to find things that were basically the same. So I started out getting the ones that I could. And then in just a minute, you'll probably see me move over to start selecting things actually on the cutting mat. That's just as easy and in some cases just as quick. The goal of this process is to group everything into the colours that you will be cutting them. So we'll have 5 colours with this in the end, and basically by putting them in these groups, it means we can send each layer out individually to our cutting machine, and they'll be in the right position to cut and then transfer to your project. And then just as one last step, you can see I'm just going to turn off a few layers so you can see the difference between the layers. Look out for those tiny little bits though, that you can see just top right of the word. They can cause you problems with vinyl. You might even want to delete them. They're not super important. Depends what scale you're doing this design at. And on that basis, obviously once you've done this, and grouped it as a project like this, you can resize it to fit whatever you fancy. So if I increase my matte size to 12 by 24, you can see how you can resize this. Because it is a vector graphic, it will resize everything proportionately and everything will work really well. Okay, so like I said, there's a few ideas. I'm just going to reorganize my cutting mat. Don't worry about what's happening on screen. There's a few ideas for creating different styles of shadow layers. I hope it's proved useful. Again, as I said, remember I do have a whole bunch of videos here on YouTube. Also, I've got the Facebook group, which is heading towards 3,500 members now, which is awesome. And I've also got 2 full courses over on Udemy, one about the scan and cut from start to finish, and the other purely dedicated to Canvas Workspace. So if you do feel you need any help or support with either of those, please do come over to udemy.com and look for me, John Bloodworth, Gentleman Crafter. Or of course, check below the video on YouTube where I will leave links. Or of course, check out my blog, gentlemancrafter.com. In the meantime, thanks very much for watching, and I hope to see you again next Saturday for another one of these random creative videos. Bye for now.